But anyways, and long story short, I don't know if you guys, I think Carly has experienced this in the math class, but it just felt like such a violation of this like sacred space that we have, and so my confidence, you know, got shook by it. So I was very panicky this morning and wanted to do a couple tests. But I love you guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your video too, just so I can see you, because
it's important having the face-to-face contact.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Share my video, but I'm in my bathroom.
I love it. Good stuff. All right. So I will have to go into this video and like remove the emotions from it. But anyway, okay. So hopefully we won't get any bombing. I have finished the pandemic book. I am so excited. I can take that off my list. I did add a few things to our lecture, obviously, because I'm obsessed with this book and teaching you about it. So I'm going to share the screen, and hopefully nobody else gets the screen but us. Okay. All right. I think we left off right after Ebola, maybe, or we were going to start on ticks, because that might be good segue for Taylor. Are you guys seeing the thumbnails of the PowerPoint? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, cholera. I put a couple new cholera things up here that I wanted to share. So I'm gonna take us back a couple slides. So climate change. We've already had our climate change lecture, but I thought it, you know, it worthy of us taking a moment here, thinking about what's going to happen to this bacteria as temperatures warm and water, you know, sea surface temperatures warm and stuff. So they had mentioned that, you know, there, in the ocean, right, the populations of plankton kind of cycle. We see it in Lake Champlain all the time. And because they're tied to plankton, these researchers began looking at what might happen as things warm. So they talked in 1926 that cholera seemed to have disappeared, back only found in the Bay of Bengal where it was originally found. But it really hadn't disappeared. The strain that ravaged the world, known as classic 01 Vibrio cholera, had died out, but before vanishing, it spawned a sneaky descendant, one well suited to exploit new areas, the changing sea, and also thrive in rivers, estuaries, lakes, and ponds, at least 3 times longer than that original classic one. It was resilient and could withstand antibiotics, and it was not until the 1970s that that descendant cholera was found, and that was found in the El Tor region of the Sinai Peninsula. And so the shallow warm plankton choked body of water was great home for this particular Vibrio. Lots of dam building, irrigation, you know, dried up a lot of the water bodies. And so the lake, which probably, you know, had conditions that were worse for them, actually made it, you know, an even worse scenario. In 1990, it arrived in South America. It was timed with El Nino, which we know, you know, is a function of a lot of crazy weather, changing weather patterns, changing air mass and water flow. Warm patch of water unleashed rain clouds in the air above it, acted like a boulder dropping in a stream, changing global climate patterns, increasing bushfires. The warm patch of water collided into the west coast of Peru in 1990 and altered the plankton community. Local zooplankton populations crashed and equatorial zooplankton populations rushed in, and then the current flowed north, reversing direction, and the Vibrio went with it. So the cholera is moving in these El Nino waters. In these harsh conditions, they cling to the lining of the gut of the copepod. They can reach 5,000 times higher than when free living, and the bacteria can persist for more than a year. and they moved about that Peruvian coastline. And so this new strain, the El Toro cholera, really kind of had an impact over there. It sickened 72,000 Peruvians, spread across the continent through rivers into Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, and to the border of the US. The surf hit Los Angeles. You know, it impacted, what's his name? Baywatch, Hasselhoff. And you know, lots of people sickened. And what was interesting is by 1994, it picked up a new trick. It acquired new genes from the predecessor, secreting same kinds of killer toxins, and now more resilient to the environment as the environment is changing. And what they found to be interesting is that up until 2010, even though cholera was kind of, you would think it would be found in pockets of places with higher rates of poverty, and there wasn't a lot of you know, sewer and infrastructure in Haiti. They thought there was something interesting about the topography in Haiti that buffered it from cholera. They never really had these massive outbreaks, right? And so they said here, you know, Haiti was strangely immune to cholera. It first arrived in the Caribbean in 1833 in Cuba, but while it spread over the region, including the Dominican Republic and parts of Hispaniola, there was no record of it showing up in Haiti. And remember, it wasn't like until 2006 where they started getting sewer into Haiti. And so, you know, they thought maybe it was something about the soil. They were, you know, preventing those toxins to survive, something about the atmosphere. It'd be really interesting for people to dig into this. But as soon as the massive earthquake, 7.0 earthquake happened in 2010, and the silt and the limestone washed into the rivers, the Vibrios exploded, and they were impacted for the first time. So natural disasters bringing in disease as well. Let's see, climate change here. This woman, Caldwell, really felt that the environmental impact was a big deal. Yes, Alyssa is raising her hand, learning all these new things.
Yeah.
Where are you? Yes, what's going on?
So let me lower my hand.
Yeah.
So for the cholera, like kind of coming into Haiti with the earthquake.
Yeah.
Why I don't understand exactly why it triggered it, like from the earthquake. How?
I have no idea. Yeah, I have to dig into like the primary literature on that, because they thought it was something about the stability of their soil, or maybe something in the atmosphere. I mean, I don't know how different it would be from some of those other countries not so far away that buffered them, especially when their conditions were so horrible up until recently. But maybe it was just the tipping point of people having to come in closer contact, or something shifting with the water sources. I'm not sure. If I find anything in literature, because I am really curious about this, why they were spared, or maybe just not enough people were there monitoring health to pick up on it, you know, and they just assumed it was one disease or just, you know, something, and didn't diagnose it as that, or the outbreak wasn't wide enough. But it's fascinating. I thought that was kind of worth us making mention of. If I find anything, I'll definitely let you know.
I think
maybe worth talking to Colin about it too. He teaches the soil class. He may have read something. So, you know, Caldwell comes in with her theories, the environment playing an important role in infectious disease. You have to think about the biological, social, political, and economy in talking about disease. And she came up with this cholera paradigm. And basically, infections from 2006 and 2008, and again, this is cholera. Like, you wouldn't expect, you know, we have understanding of how cholera is treated and whatnot, right? The infections grew by 43%, and this was in the United States. Pathogenic Vibrio had spread into places they'd never been problematic before: Alaska, Chile, and Iceland, infesting shellfish and threatening those who eat it. So this woman, she does her research at University of Maryland, and they met up with her, and she basically had this kind of shift, made people kind of consider that these things were changing. looking at how climate change influences these infectious diseases, thinking about a cold snap in a winter that led mute swans to alter migration patterns in 2006, bringing that H5N1 into European countries. Mild winter in 1999, allowing mosquitoes to breed in New York City, again, West Nile virus, right? So thinking about these weird anomalies. I wonder what's going on with our, you know, how we get the jet stream that dips down with the polar vortex. You know, what changes is that going to bring? More rainfall can lead to more malaria, creating more puddles and ponds for the Aedes aegypti. Droughts can lead to more malaria by turning rivers stagnant. So more water and droughts can both lead to malaria, which I think is interesting. Let's see, again, heavy rainfall bringing in West Nile. We can imagine that that would be true. Heavy, warmer temperatures expanding the range of ticks, bats, mosquitoes as well, expanding their range. In North America, the mosquito carrier of yellow fever and dengue, long restricted to the Gulf states, pops up in California. The Asian tiger mosquito going into higher latitudes in Italy. Warmer weather bringing bark beetles, making them really active. I got a picture here, 2003 to 2013, and a picture of this this bark beetle, but ravaging Wyoming. So probably, you know, affecting Mark's study sites. I think he did a lot of his work out there. We talked, I think, about this, right? Insect-borne disease. Did I show you these maps of Tripoli and West Nile in our area? I think we had mentioned, I have to give Alyssa a shout out, right? And we mentioned Zika and how the mosquitoes are predicted to be moving up into our area, even though it seemed to be a more southern thing. Vaccines kind of in the works. This has sort of gone by the wayside. It seems to have subsided. But again, the anencephaly with the children. We mentioned West Nile and how birds are involved, equine can be involved, and mosquitoes and affecting us. So we did mention this part. The weird symptoms that involve their nervous system. Mosquito-borne disease and the grouse, we did talk about that and how, you know, their loss of habitat and that habitat split. Carly, we talked about that last time. 2/3 of important stages in their life require them to have that early successional forest, and we seem to be losing that as forests move into later successional habitats. And they're being affected by the same mosquitoes that are carrying West Nile to what we would normally have thought, you know, would be the corvids, the crows. And then climate change, right? Climate change, flooding their nests, you know, the heat of the nest, of the temperatures impacting the chicks in the nest. It all kind of playing into the trophic pyramid. So it's affecting the raptors who eat these grouse in the wintertime, especially with their numbers low. What are these northern goshawks going to eat? And then just having to consider what our hunting habits are going to be, maybe changing the season, closing the season, that sort of thing. Maybe we stopped at Ebola. I can't. Yeah, we did talk a little bit about Ebola and how bats maybe are involved. Again, they're very sloppy eaters, and we talked about them having weird immune systems and wide ranges and stuff. But these outbreaks and how it's not just the wildlife themselves coming into contact. It can be us and our behaviors that precipitate the spread of some of these diseases. So in this case, there was that cultural component of being with the dead body, bathing the dead body and coming in contact with them. Also not having, you know, enough PPE and all that kind of stuff. So this hit in Guinea. And we did mention, I think, habitat fragmentation and how that can impact certain organisms. The muskrats pick up this disease. The lions get more aggressive, and social stress can lead to changes in their social organization. We covered Lyme, and this, again, probably is a good time for us to pause maybe and draw in Riley's discussion, and then we'll bring in Taylor's. So I'm going to switch over to those handouts. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Can you guys see Riley's handout? Okay. All right. Yeah, so Tal Levy is doing some really cool stuff, and looking at community and the diversity in the community and how that may play into Lyme disease. So I'm going to let Riley take over in his discussion.
All right, so can everybody hear me? Awesome.
Yep.
So Lyme disease is the most prevalent vector-borne disease in North America. It's caused by a bacteria which is transferred to humans through the nymphal stage. So previous studies have said that the growing abundance of deer throughout eastern United States is the primary cause, although a growing body of evidence argues that small mammal abundance is playing a stronger role. So some of the small mammals include the white-footed mouse, the eastern chipmunk, short-tailed shrew, and masked shrew, and they're influenced by resource availability and predation. So what was interesting is how there's a correlation that coincides with an increase in small mammal population and the decline of the red fox. So they were saying that one of the causes of this decline in the red fox was because of the expansion of the coyote, taking out the predator prey of the red fox, because the red fox can cache a lot more small mammals than the coyote can. So this article examined spatial and temporal correlations at multiple scales between Lyme disease, coyote, fox, and deer abundance. They concluded both spatial and temporal evidence across multiple states, which was Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New York, that changes in predator abundance is more closely related to the increase in Lyme disease rather than the changes in deer abundance. So they were saying that basically deer abundance has no play in it. So overall, the study illustrates that medium-sized carnivores such as coyotes can indirectly impact the abundance and diversity of low trophic level species such as rodents and songbirds by reducing populations of smaller carnivores such as foxes. So in tying this into class, the conservation class, understanding the consequences and predator abundance for community composition can help scientists better manage conservation of these species at lower levels. And also I found it was pretty interesting in this article, it says that Lyme disease is notably rare in Western New York, which I find pretty interesting because that's where I'm from.
Yeah.
And the deer abundance is just like through the roof. So
do they think it has something to do with the coyote numbers? Are there any estimates on coyotes for out there?
They talked about coyote hunters and how that's increasing. So yeah.
Interesting. Huh. I wonder.
Might see a shift. And then I had a couple questions.
Yeah.
So what other examples learned in class illustrate the effects on the ecosystem from the removal of the top predator? So I thought we talked about like the wolves and that whole effect of that happening. And that can have just varying effects from top down.
Yep.
Removal of the predator. So, and then what are some good management tools to aid in decreasing the abundance of small mammals? I was thinking maybe like could reintroduce some foxes, but then it'd still be like that competition for resources and
Yeah.
space.
Well, and we'll also learn a couple slides later, I talk a little bit about rabies, and that may play into rabies too. What are your thoughts on like management of the land you own, like property management, clearing forest away from, where you live, reducing the amount of certain tree species? I think you guys talked a little bit about silvicultural practices with Mark. I know we did a little in wildlife with the amphibians.
I mean, I live on 5 acres, and there's just like grass, then woods, and then a field in the back. So there's mice, like field mice that run around and everything. So we do find ticks on our dogs.
Yeah.
I don't really know how. I mean, you could probably, I know when I do like brush hogging and stuff, there's always hawks that fly around and over because it always kicks up those small mammals.
Yeah.
They can hunt them. So that would be a good practice for like fields and stuff.
Yeah. Doing something to increase your raptor population, which can help in knocking them back.
Mhm.
Definitely something to consider. Oh, Rachel's waiting to come in. Good. I like this. I feel much more secure with this waiting room. Hey, Rachel. Okay. Any questions on that? Just another interesting thing to consider. You know, actually, Romanowitz emailed me yesterday a question not related at all to work stuff, which is kind of rare. But he wrote wondering why he is starting to see more red squirrels in his yard as compared to gray. And I found that to be interesting, and it made me pause because I live in the woods. So we're both in Peru, but I live in the woods, like a big tract of woods, and the river is behind me between the marshes. And he lives over by the school in the residential, like all the networked neighborhoods, you know, where I go to trick or treat with the kids because there's no neighbors around me. And so I was surprised because normally in, like, I don't know, these residential areas or, you know, suburbs, you tend to see a lot of gray squirrels. That's kind of what my feeling had been. And it's probably because of garbage and bird feeders and, you know, all that kind of stuff, planting, you know, berries and, you know, certain kind of trees in your area, drawing them in. And then I normally think of red squirrels as being more in the woods and territorial and aggressive that way. So I found that to be interesting, and I wondered if it had something to do with this article. Like maybe I live in an area where there's, you know, more coyote. I hear them all the time, and having more coyote maybe shifts how many fox we have, which shifts something with the small mammal population. So I did make mention of that to him. Have you guys noticed that? I don't know what your habitat's like back home, but have you noticed more reds and less grays anywhere?
So I live like down in Port Henry, and I'm not like too far from the lake, but I'm like on the outskirts of Port Henry, so it's like it's pretty rural, but I don't have like we live on like 3/4 of an acre, so it's not like we have a bunch of land. But we don't normally see anything bigger than like a couple of deer coming through. And a couple of years ago, like we have gray squirrels and we have red squirrels, and a couple of years ago we had an issue with some red squirrels where they would be getting into our house
Yeah.
like around fall, and then like when we'd have like a false spring, then we'd get like cold again. They'd come into our house again.
Yeah.
But it's really like it comes in waves.
In
I haven't
cycle,
seen them.
yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that there is that pulse of small mammals, and I sort of thought it affected all of those seed predators similarly. But, you know, I wonder if, you know, those foxes prey, you know, they have a preferred prey. I also wonder if maybe the winter being more mild or less mild impacted one of those species more than the other. I also told him, like, I'm seeing chippies galore. So I wonder if a rise in chippies knocks back one of those species. So there could be something, you know, across those three species who compete for seeds that's playing into it too. So shining a light on how totally complex ecology can be. I had no answer for him, which is very common when I talk about ecology stuff. It could be this, it could be that, it could be, yeah. Anyways, great job, Riley. Okay. All right, so let's move on to another tick-borne. So I'll go back to that same slide. We had mentioned Babesia, ehrlichiosis, anaplasmosis, not always transmitted by the same tick, the black-legged tick. Some others are involved, but antibiotics always being important. And Rocky Mountain spotted fever, one that we think is, you know, on the rise, and obviously climate change and habitat, land use change habitat loss and fragmentation, increasing the incidences. And then Powassan, we talked about being really virulent and transmitting real quickly and having a higher fatality rate. So again, transmitted by the black-legged tick, deer tick. Looks like our state is one of the highest incidence of this, and knowing that we have ticks like crazy and are on that like advancing front, I think we're going to get hammered with this one. And I don't think they have really a good treatment yet, or a vaccine or anything that is going to be able to knock this back. So again, just us being real careful with our tick checks. We brought this up kind of thinking about what season we're in, and what ticks are going to be out, and have they fed on a mouse to pick up the Borrelia. And then
I already had like 3 on me.
Yeah, it's a bad year. Every day I'm pulling them off of bogs. It's crazy. And Rowan is a magnet for them. I actually was, as I was prepping this, I was reading kids like age 5 to 14, I think it was, boys have a way higher rate of contracting Lyme than any other demographic. So I'm totally lucky there, right? Okay, so we did talk about Hanta, but let's bounce over to Taylor's article. And it was a brief one, but I think, Taylor, remind me, I think you found some additional information, right?
Yeah, I included the paper because this was a review.
Okay.
So I included the paper that it was based on, and used some of that too.
All right, what do we got?
So the Lone Star tick, so they're expanding the range, increased global temperatures, ecological changes, reforestation, things like that. But with persistently warmer temperatures, they're also expanding their active season. These guys are different. Let me know if I got this right. Most ticks will kind of sit and wait.
Yeah.
Something to go by, and they'll attach that way. These guys only want to have like a large host, so they'll travel really far to find a suitable host.
Yeah. You guys know about the questing behavior of ticks? No? So a tick will go to the top of a branch, to the top of a part of grass. They'll cluster, and then they go like this. It's disgusting. They quest. And so deer will, or your dog will walk by, and then they brush up against it, and it's like, whoop, and they all cluster on. So sometimes, when you find ticks, you tend to find a couple at a time, and it's because of that questing behavior. But they group up, and then they latch on off the top of that, perch, so to speak. But these will like chase you down.
Mm-hmm.
Scary.
So that's also playing a factor in why they're spreading so rapidly. So both the black-legged tick and the Lone Star tick seem to be recolonizing areas where they historically thrived as we continue reforestation, and that brings back their key host species. So they are associated with a lot of diseases. Some of these I can't say. And they're unique because they can cause the red meat allergy.
Oh, tell us more about that. What's that?
Yeah, so they get this bacteria, and once that's transmitted, I think it stops like an enzyme in the body. So, and then your body sees the red meat as something that shouldn't be there, and basically you'll have a allergic reaction.
Gotcha.
And that can go on for months, some people.
Yeah, I thought you said red knee.
Oh no.
So you can't eat steak. Oh no. Yeah.
Isn't it irreversible?
I've looked at a couple people. Some seem to that they eventually can go back. I don't know how they got to that, and then there's some people that can't ever have it again.
For life. Oh, interesting.
I've actually died.
Somebody I know, my little cousin went to school with somebody who had it, and she had no idea for like months, and obviously like had the allergic reaction to meat, and she had to go to the doctor like obviously a bunch of times, And once they found out about it, they like must have treated it in some way so that she can kind of eat a little bit of red meat,
Mhm.
but not like she did before.
Wow.
Mhm.
It's so weird. I'm telling you, parasites are crazy. These ticks and disease. It's nuts.
So it doesn't take many for them to establish a population. Just a few females can lay thousands of eggs, and so they establish fairly quick. They'll travel long distances. I already did that. And their transmission of diseases, they kind of just bite anything. So even if you're not like a target species or anything like that, they'll still bite and they can transmit all these things. So as far as management concerns, with the black-legged tick, they target smaller like rodent species, but because that's not a target species for them, it's making management really difficult. So that was one of my questions. If you guys can think of any strategies that you think could be helpful, since their traditional isn't working.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like broadcast chemical spraying is not useful with ticks. I think, using rodenticides is a bad one because there's all those other animals that are going to get impacted.
Yeah, by mistake.
And where is there, I don't know if you're going to speak about this. Oh yeah, you've got a map here. Is there one particular locale that seems to be a hotspot?
So the red are where they're already established, which seems weird to me because like the city down here, they don't have a lot of large hosts. You know what I mean? Or that's not the city. Yeah.
Just like me, I have no idea where New York City is.
I know Long Island is really badly hit with the Lone Star tick.
Yeah. So it's
They have really bad deer population, I think.
Yeah, is it the mice and the deer and the sand dunes and the habitat? I have no idea where the heck I am. Are we even in New York anymore? Is this like the Jersey Pinelands?
Yes, that's Jersey, and then that long swath coming out of Jersey, that's all Long Island, and then you have Cape Cod.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's
like-
the sand. It's the sand. It's totally the
Fleas
sand.
and ticks love sandy soil.
They also associated it with invasive plant species because that's where the deer will flock. So
I
that
gotcha.
might-
Buckthorn and honeysuckle and all that.
yeah. But the colder areas seem to be safe so far.
The which areas?
Colder areas, so like up in Maine where there's nothing. And
Out of curiosity, Alyssa, when you were out doing your sampling at Ruger, any ticks?
Not that I noticed, but I also like dressed like a horrible nerd so I wouldn't get ticks. Like I'd always have my socks pulled way up over and like several layers of shirts.
Beautiful.
So yeah, I never noticed them. The mosquitoes were bad,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not a lot of ticks.
Which, speaking of, again, I got to stop reading. It's like exacerbating the mania that I'm experiencing. But Key West, back in 2013, some mosquito cropped up, and I want to say it was this new disease. I'm not going to say it right, but it sounds like chikungunya, which is like ravaging Brazil and some of those other countries down there, was creeping in. And they were like angry people that were doing, reporting in that area saying, are you guys taking precautions? And the residents were like, whatever, it's mosquitoes. Like, I'm not going to spray, I'm not going to spray myself with repellent. That's just nonsense. Like, they're just mosquitoes. But I can imagine that is a disease that will easily move up into this area. Alyssa, with your mosquito work, is that one that's cropped in on the radar?
Not from what we did last summer. The only thing we looked at besides West Nile and Eastern Equine is we were keeping an eye out for the mosquito that carries Zika, but I never found it.
Okay, that's good news. All right, so I digress. All right, and I say that because like I was down in Key West probably during a little bit of that time, not even realizing that that was a concern. So Taylor, is there anything, did I go too far or am I in the right spot?
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay.
So this graph at the bottom is what I pulled from the original article where they tested, so they kept track of the temperatures in Connecticut and Maine, and then the percentages above or below the bars is the survival rate of the adult Lone Star tick. So they either did leaf removal or snow removal, a couple different treatments, and concluded that only the combination treatment had a significant effect. So basically, these guys can survive under pretty harsh conditions as far as cold, and then as temperatures continue to warm, we'll see them establish more and more. And lastly, the article suggested that the Lone Star tick might displace other local tick species. So we could see a lot of different pathogens. Good news, they can't transmit Lyme disease, but they do transmit one that causes similar symptoms, so people are often misdiagnosed. But we could see a reduction in Lyme, but then an increase in all of these others.
Yeah. Silver lining? I don't know. Oh, ticks suck. They're awful. They're awful.
I literally just pulled one off my dog.
Oh, yes. My jar. I have a jar, honestly. Let me, hold on, you guys, because I think
You
this
have
is
a
like
jar?
important. Oh, yes, I have a jar. Not only for the wildlife class, just because like he comes in with so many. I'm going on to Amazon right now. You can't see that, but I'm going to do, I don't normally like promote a lot of things to buy, but this is something that you should buy. Hold on. I have to go into my orders. Of course, it won't arrive until like December because it's not likely considered essential, yes. Here are my orders. My account, my orders. Here we go. Yeah, the Easter Bunny has been busy. I actually just bought a ukulele the other day. Not for me, for Chris for his birthday, because he happened to watch something on YouTube, and I know he's like, oh, those are pretty interesting. I'm like, oh, maybe that's something I should get. All right. Uncle Bill's Sliver Gripper. I'm going to move it over here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. They are magic. This is what you should buy. Not the thing that pries and then you twist, not the regular tweezers for our eyebrows. But Uncle Bill's Sliver Gripper is a dual action, can get you out of a jam with a splinter, but will definitely pull that tick off right in the right spot. Intense strength. It's like fused metal. I don't know. You could probably make this on your own. But they're amazing. And I swear by them. And I think you can probably put it on a keychain with these little holes too. So that's what I would recommend. I tried to buy 6 of them. They come in 3 packs, and Chris is like, "What are you just throw money?" I'm like, "We can put them on our keychain." He's like, "I'm not putting these on my keychain." That is my recommendation to you guys to stay safe. But anyway, great job, Taylor. These things are horrible, horrible. Okay. But we are aware. As Alyssa has demonstrated, we have to wear our attire and look ridiculous, but just stay safe. Okay. Hanta we talked about as being a pulmonary syndrome, feeling like you're drowning in your, hard to breathe, pulmonary edema in your lungs, but typically associated with the desert Southwest and associated with the heavy rain years where the mice explode. And it would be people coming in contact with the aerosols in the urine and the feces. And then canine distemper, this is a timeline of CDV, canine distemper virus, you know, attacking a bunch of canines, jumping over to some seals, and we've got it in lions and macaques. So again, it's crossing species. And again, another respiratory situation, you get an immunological response, a neurological response. This is what really took down the black-footed ferret and resulted in them having to do extreme captive breeding, to the point where I remember reading an article about the guy who was like in charge of this effort, and he had to make the decision to take, I think, like the last 2 and bring them into captivity, knowing that like if this goes wrong, the whole species is gone. So it did work. They reintroduced them. And again, hitting the Serengeti lions, the wild dogs, and Isle Royale too. I think I mentioned to you guys in class that that's what really knocked the wolves down to a low number, is that, you know, somebody's pet dog coming over and spreading it to the wolves and dropping them down to an abundance where their social structure collapsed, and then all that inbreeding effect. So these are seropositive antibodies in some of the wolves out there. So what went on with the Serengeti lions? This was kind of new to me, but climate change was important in bringing this to a head, and co-infection with other diseases. So like the black-legged tick carrying multiple diseases along with Lyme, this distemper, we seem to see other things like babesia, co-infection with babesia and other things bringing these animals down. So these are the Serengeti lions. They're out in the crater. It's a smallish population of them. They've been monitored long term. They've been looking at their blood. They've had epidemics of this infection coming through. And again, what really seemed to tip them over the edge was that co-infection with that tick-borne babesia. Outbreaks, you know, precipitated by extreme drought events. So how does climate change kind of play into this? And the drought knocks out their prey, right? So they don't have anything to eat. They become emaciated. They're immunocompromised as a result of that. And then they go and eat whatever they can. So they end up going after these Cape buffalo that have the ticks. And that's where they pick up that babesia, which further impacts their immune system. And then we get the massive die-offs. And so that's really what ended up happening with them. This is a general overview of, you know, many sources of human disease. We've talked about a few of them. West Nile we haven't gotten to yet. Tularemia I bring up in our general ecology class. The rabbits get sluggish, and then the predators can get them more often. It also impacts rodents. And this is trichinosis. So we always are told you have to make sure you cook your pork very well, right? Because you can pick up the cysts of trichinosis, and that's kind of the life cycle there, from rodent on to pig through in through us. The saxitox and many of these things we've covered already. So rabies, did we talk about this? I'm totally not remembering if we got to rabies.
I don't think we did.
Okay. Always kind of cautious about animals that are nocturnal or crepuscular, but they're active during the day and kind of behaving weird. So actually I was driving into town maybe 2 weekends ago, and there was a red fox that like was trying to cross the road, and then all of a sudden just sat down in the middle of the road near the oval, and just started like itching as cars were coming, you know, back and forth. So that's kind of, you know, on your radar. But rabies is a virus that's in the saliva of our common vectors, right? The skunks, bats, and raccoons. You get that encephalitis kind of response like we've seen in some of these others, and it's very, very deadly. In 2004, it was one of the first times where somebody actually survived rabies. They were in a coma. They got a bunch of antiviral drugs, which is typically what they're given. And so she did fight it. But then 5 months later, she started having these setbacks, these neurological setbacks, unsteady gait and all that kind of stuff. So big concern. I wanted to throw this up here because it's directly related to, you know, who we need to watch out for in our area. So this map shows you the reservoir species for rabies. And so we have raccoon rabies, but bats can also transmit, and we're on the watch for skunk rabies too. Although it's not listed here, this could be that it's a couple years older, but I know that that was something that they were looking at in our area. So I found an article, this one right here, where they were doing roadkill surveys, and I think USDA office that's up near Canine Adventure on Route 22 North, they used to do this. Kaylee McChesney, now married, I don't remember her last name, but she spent a summer just going around. This is not my dream job, but I can understand the need, but shoveling roadkill into the back of the pickup truck for them, and then they were testing it for rabies. So she was picking up raccoons and skunks and other potential foxes as well, reservoirs. And so seeing here the survey, the positives are the dots that are black, and in our area, this was in 2007. I'm sure that some of this results from her collection, the negatives. So good news that, you know, along these survey lines, we seem to have negatives. Something's going on over here in Jefferson County. I don't know, maybe that's Watertown. I don't know. But anyway, you can see here the trend in rabid animals over time. The trend seems to be declining. Oh, here comes Rowan. But they do vaccine. A second. Anyways, vaccines work. It would be baseline domestic animals, wildlife cases. So our animals are vaccinated against rabies, right? We have to have the little tag to show it and give it to the animal officers, and even though these might be high, the wildlife, we're not seeing it transmitted to our other canids. And so what are some of the preventatives that they're doing? I don't know if you guys have ever been out on a hike, but I remember taking my dogs down to Ausable Marsh and them just going to town on something that would be like in the shrubs or on the ground. And it's these baits that they drop from the air. I must have like missed the alert, that it's coated in like a fish meal. So it's very attractive to skunks and to raccoons and other animals. So they'll be attracted to that fish meal, they'll consume it, they're actually getting a rabies vaccine that way. Apparently it's not harmful to our dogs, because I'm sure that I didn't get to my dog's mouth, fast enough a couple times, but they definitely do drops in our area around here. Plague. So I might have mentioned this in some of my classes, but when I took my kids to the desert from at St. Lawrence University, we were camping overnight in the state parks, and I remember them shutting down some of the state parks that summer that we went out for this class, and it was from the plague. So the plague is transmitted via flea bites. So think of the desert animals as being some of the important carriers of some of those fleas. So there's a few different types of plague. The one that they were concerned about was bubonic plague. The response is like a lymphatic response, and those are the resulting buboes, the swellings that are caused. But here's the distribution of the plague. So even though many of us thought plague was something of the past, it's actually still around. Look at that beautiful dog joining the show.
Took my
Yes. So it's the bacterium Yersinia pestis, again, transmitted by flea, and they get that lymph response and the swellings in the armpits and areas where you would expect to see lymph nodes. And, you know, the infected fleas with the plague bacterium starve that bacteria. They put a plug in, blocking entry to the flea's stomach. They bite more aggressively as a result of that and regurgitate it back into the host. And then when the hosts start declining as a result of being impacted, they'll move over to others. These are the swellings, those buboes that we were talking about. And we tend to, again, see it in the Four Corners area and in parts of the desert that have, you know, high rains, brings the seeds, brings the rodents, their populations increase. So prairie dog colonies, chipmunks, wood rats, and they can manage it with insecticides to reduce the amount of fleas. But testing, you know, not testing, but, you know, they go and spray the burrows. They'll close down the parks and they'll spray the burrows. And they will close it down if there are cases of plague, obviously. But you can see here, outside of Flagstaff, you know, there's been some kind of health reports. And this was in 2017, so it's, you know, it's still a concern. Avian flu, right? So avian flu, H5N1, I remember when this happened. It is largely a poultry industry kind of thing, and also wild birds. Again, their saliva, mucus, feces, their excreta. And when we come in contact with them, which could be on one of those, you know, farms, could be in one of those wet markets, we get those outbreaks. We saw that it happened in these locales, and in 2015, it actually crossed over and got brought over with a duck. And what is interesting is there was this reassortment of the viral genes, and it became a new, more virulent virus. And so they're, again, working on vaccines for this stuff. The thing that they do is to cull all the animals. That's like what their typical response would be. There's been no human reported cases of this, but the people that come in close contact with live or dead birds are going to be the ones that would be at greatest risk. The outbreak is cause for concern because if it did, there'd be 60% mortality rate. And this is what I found from the book to be really interesting. So, sorry, it's grainy. Must have been my lighting. How H5N1 gained the ability to infect humans is not really clear. Some speculate it's livestock, pigs that might have played a role. One of the biological barriers to the spread of bird flu is in humans is the fact that bird-adapted viruses bind, and this is really important. I've seen this a couple times now in the last couple days. The bird-adapted viruses bind to sialic acids in birds that aren't present in humans. So theoretically, H5N1 or some other bird-adapted virus could spontaneously mutate in such a way that it can bind to human sialic acids. But there's another faster way for novel flu viruses to acquire that ability, and it's through that reassortment that I talked about, where a virus will take a chunk of new genes from another one, and will take on all those genetic properties that that other virus had conferred. And it can reassort and infect people. And, you know, it could even be relatively mild flu that it reassorts with. And that's how that virus could transmit really efficiently in humans, as it could jump in and reassort with our regular flu that we get our flu shots for every year, right? Reassortment of this kind can happen only in cells co-infected with both viruses at the same time. But since human flu binds to human sialic acid and avian flu binds to avian sialic acid, people don't get easily infected with these bird flus, right? Which is why we saw that it's, you know, even though it's 60% death rates, we just didn't see high instances of humans being impacted. And so here it says, you know, birds aren't easily infected with human flu. Thus, even with massive flocks of poultry moving across these international borders and people exposed to excretia, we don't really see this happening very often. And that is where the pigs come in. Again, I was not aware of any of this stuff. Pigs have both human-like sialic acid on the surface of their cells as well as avian-like ones. So there we go, right? This is true of quails too, but the small scale of quail farming doesn't play a huge role in flu transmission, I guess. Pigs live in proximity to both humans and poultry or wild waterfowl, and could be the mysterious missing link between bird viruses and human flu pandemics. They call it a mixing vessel. And so, you know, they talk about blah, blah, blah. A variant of H3N2, a virus normally infecting pigs, started spreading into people in 2012. The flu virus is categorized by proteins on the surface, and crowded pigs, airborne clouds of virus in barns, inhaled by local people. Where do pigs come in contact with people? Roaming state fairs. Boys. So again, all these things, right? I went to the Syracuse Fair, right? The big New York State Fair, and there's always these pens of pigs. In fact, I think my sister down in Texas, don't they have like rodeos where the little kids ride the pigs? So, you know, these are all things that I had not even, you know, thought about the implications for. Moving on to chronic wasting disease, and this is where we've got our ungulates involved. Right here is a visual of tonsil biopsy. So it's kind of like a hole punch that goes down the throat and grabs a little piece of the tonsil to test for chronic wasting. I think I mentioned this. So chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a prion disease. A prion is a folded protein. Remember how proteins have that, you know, tertiary and quaternary structure. We all have prions. It's when they begin to kind of build and have misshapen folding patterns that they get out of control. And so this is kind of what it normally would look like when it goes into its folding. And when a mutation happens and the folding gets kind of unleashed in these odd shapes and configurations, we get things like chronic wasting disease. And in humans, there's like a familial insomnia where all of a sudden you kind of go catatonic. There's sporadic Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's another thing. These prions, these misshapen proteins, affect your nervous system, and they basically will turn your brain into Swiss cheese. That FFI is the familial insomnia. And so you'll see here in, say, deer or elk, you've got, you know, all your lymphatic tissues, the spinal cord, your spleen, your brain, and you can get the prion buildup in these areas, sloughed off in the digestive system. And the thing is, the animal may not act weird for a long period of time. So incubation is, you know, quite a while, and then your symptomatic period is very short in relation to that. How do we deal with these diseases? Usually it's a multiple kind of a factor approach, using integrative pest management, obviously looking at GIS maps to see where hotspots of the animal distributions are, to target these areas, whether or not you're going to cull, hunt them and reduce their numbers so there's not as many of them to spread the disease. Or you're going to apply some kind of a chemical or do some of the treatment. Anti-helminthic, these are the helminth worms, and then the mollusks. Not like I think we can do this with our quagga or zebra mussels, but there are chemicals that can be applied. Think of lampricides as well. There's treatments to remove them. But another one of the management options would be to reduce the numbers of those that are carrying it, right? So delaying your open day, extending or shortening your season of hunting, changing which gender, maybe one gender behaves differently and carries it more so than the other, shifting that as well. This is an Easter egg hunt, if you're wondering where the heck that comes hunting. And then the Tasmanian devil facial tumor, very sad situation here with the TASs, a non-viral cancer, very much spread by their behavior, their aggression. They're very social and like I said, gregarious and will bite each other. But it's a 20 to 50% decline in these devils. They get these small tumors from their bites, which grow and become necrotic. The immune system doesn't recognize the tumor cells as foreign, so it basically just eats away, and they tend to not live very long. Management would be to cull those who have been infected, and then do some captive breeding with those that seem to have been spared, and that seems to be what's going on. Good news on that front, though. I think in wildlife class we may not have talked about this paper, but in 2019, January of 2019, they actually figured out what was causing this, because this is very odd that a cancer spreads this way. And so they've identified the signaling axis as a central molecular driver. And now that they've figured that out, they can start thinking about drugs, maybe vaccines or something that can be given to these animals, which might be possible because their numbers are not really high anymore. Fungal pathogens, and again, there's a lot of them. The one you're probably most familiar with would be white nose syndrome, but there's also ones with snakes. And I found this to be interesting from the last part of the book, right? While pathogenic bacteria and viruses plague humans, aside from the odd yeast infection or athlete's foot, we suffer very few fungal pathogens. So we get a lot of bacterial pathogens, but we don't get many fungal. And this could be a function of us being warm-blooded, right? This researcher says, unlike reptiles and plants and insects that fall prey to fungal pathogens, mammals keep their bodies scorching. This is year-round. And most fungi are adapted to environmental temperatures that can't take the heat of our blood and perish on our oven-like bodies. Heat's an effective antidote for infection that reptiles try it too. They produce these artificial fevers and sun themselves, so they'll go out and bask to reduce the fungal infection. Climate change, this is where it gets kind of upsetting. Climate change can produce the same result on a planet-wide scale, slowly training fungus to tolerate increasing temperatures, including at some point the heat of our blood. Heat-tolerating fungi, if they emerge, would pose an infectious disease threat to us like no other. Except for warm-bloodedness, we have no defenses against them. And if you don't believe me, ask the amphibians. And we're talking about how they're responding to chytrid and ranavirus type stuff. As global temperature rises, fungal pathogens have already started to creep into infectious disease landscapes. In California and Arizona, soil-dwelling fungus has caused 7 times more human infections. It's called valley fever in 2009 as compared to in 1997. And they're reporting twice as many of these things, dips and drives, and it's all tied to the warming temperatures. So what's going to happen over time? These animals, but also us. I can't even imagine this. So with white nose, you know, we are near the epicenter. I'm getting close on time here. And so I've never been down here to Howe's Cavern, but I think that's kind of where the epicenter was. These are, you know, bats. We've talked about bats before, but they're in their hibernacular, high densities. And if a disease were to strike them, it's going to spread and destroy that colony. Their optimal temperatures below 10 degrees, 90% of the bats die once they get infected. It's affecting a bunch of different species, not all, but a lot of them, especially the ones around here. There are hypotheses as to what is causing these declines in the bat, right? It's affecting how they hibernate. It's affecting, you know, insecticides and stuff due to West Nile, so they don't have as much food, so that plays into it. But you can see this here was the epicenter. And how do we manage this? Closing the caves, culturing the fungus, trying to think about treatments. Closing the caves to spelunkers, I know, is one big thing. Making sure you, you know, sanitize your gear with bleach and stuff. In terms of conservation medicine, you know, we first, if we're going to approach these things, we need to deal with the emergence and resurgence of these diseases. We've got to think about how pollutants can impact as well, and fragmentation, loss of biodiversity. I'm going to leave this for you guys to read at some other time. What has been really interesting in this book is just understanding that, like, the solutions have been out there for a long time. It's just getting the masses to believe these scientists that come up with these responses. Like, we knew, or people knew, what caused cholera, and the treatment was super easy, you know, and they were able to figure it out by, you know, giving some people salt water versus regular water, just by accident sometimes. And the ones that got salt water survived better than the ones that didn't, that they survived cholera better. So what do you do when you get cholera? You take Gatorade, you go get your lactated ringers, right? Your saline, and then we have sewer that, you know, removes the waste from our drinking water. All of these things are easy changes that we knew how to do. I also found it interesting, the evolution of sexual reproduction. You know, this was interesting. Maybe it was pathogens that brought on this evolution, this kind of rise in sexual reproduction. So let's just take a sec here. Let's see. The burden of random deaths was too immediate to allow benefits to manifest themselves. Thus, sexual reproduction should have been an experiment that failed, and yet it didn't. Eventually, the reproductive strategy of our most distant ancestors spread through the animal kingdom, including us. Many years later, in whom it became a central preoccupation. It was Hamilton who offered a startling explanation that solved the mystery. Sex evolved, he said, because of pathogens. Sexual reproduction requires a profound genetic sacrifice, he required, but the payback is offspring of sexual reproducers are genetically distinct from parents. That was no big advantage in surviving weather or predators, which I don't know. Sexual reproduction can make you more vigorous against predators. I don't know. Weather is very, you have no idea, but I think having predators around forces that, you know, hand of sexual reproduction. So I don't know how if I buy that about predators. But it was a huge advantage in surviving pathogens. That's because pathogens, unlike weather or predators, refine their attack upon us. That's where I don't believe it. You know, predators obviously refine their attack on us. Imagine a pathogen that first strikes when you're a baby. As you develop, the pathogen goes through hundreds and thousands of generations. By the time you're an adult, if you survive the ravages of the pathogen, you're ready to reproduce. The pathogens become far better at attacking you than you are to defending yourself against it. While your genetic makeup has stayed the same, the pathogen has evolved. But individuals who clone themselves provide pathogens exact replicas of the target they've already gotten so good at stalking. They endow their offspring with the worst possible chances of surviving their pathogens' appetites. And that is why they think that maybe sexual reproduction arose. But our biggest threat is fossil fuels. Again, I found this to be very interesting, right? If there is a single historical development that actually actuated all the various ways of human activity contributes to pandemics, it's the harnessing of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Before the discovery of this, civilization drew its energy from wood fires and human labor. To acquire more energy, society had to depend nearly equal amounts of energy in the form of felling trees or feeding slaves. There wasn't much of an energy surplus. which limited the size of human populations and their expansion across the globe, as well as frequency and scale of pandemics. But once we began relying on that, and we could kind of have leisure time, right? Finding the coal, finding the oil, best fossil fuels, so on and so forth, unleashed and allowed civilization to expand beyond what's imaginable, whether in the form of increased agricultural yields made possible through petrofertilizers or in the speed or scale of trade and transport, contributing to the emergence and spread of pathogens. Petrofertilizers doubled agricultural yields, feeding the growth of populations in the crowded cities. Coal-powered steamboats carried cholera across the oceans and canals and ferried them into the interior continents, and it powered machines that cut down forests and the airplanes that dispersed the virus once concealed across the globe. Next threats, us thinking about antibiotic resistance, right? This is something that, we have to put all our energies towards, because this is like coming down the pike. I think we're becoming more and more aware of these things now. And it's something we have to consider. Now, I did not get to my little blurb about chytrid, and I know we don't really have much time. My children are awful. We don't have much time because you guys are presenting. I gave you guys the list of the lineup in an email, right? I've got, I sent it in an email. Of course, I don't have it here. Yeah, Claire, Charlene, Nick, Sam, Casey, Jake, Kayla, Charlotte, and Hannah C. You guys will be Tuesday, and Thursday will be everybody else. So that is in an email, and you guys have the rubric on it. But just real quick, if you can stick on for one brief moment, just kind of talking about chytrid and really just wanting to show you guys the visuals. The article I had to present, chytrid is a fungus. It's a uniflagellate zoospore. It's got chitinous walls, and it anchors to the skin of these amphibians, and it increases their surface area to secrete the enzymes. It basically will attack anything keratinizing. So we don't see chytrid fungus attacking tadpoles very much. It's more so the adults. And so, this was made, that we were aware of it in 1997, seeing the decline in the rainforest frogs. It's very complex. When they did the genetic analysis on it, they found that they can be aneuploidy, which means in terms of their ploidy number and like how they double. Normally with meiosis, we separate, right? And we give one of those alleles per mom and dad, but they can have multiple copies across, as they reproduce. In terms of microclimates, it's all over in a bunch of different habitats: cool, wet, alpine, temperate, tropical. Severe declines in cooler and wetter, less thermally variable places. And it's strongly mediated by the response of the life history characteristics of certain amphibians, right? Temperature of the ectothermic amphibian hosts, growth is restricted between these temperatures. In lab studies, BD reproduced more slowly at lower temperatures, but zoospores were active for longer. So although it may persist differently, that temperature is going to impact how this transmits, right? And any animal who can bask longer and be warmer and dry out will be impacted less. So think of how different animal behaviors would impact them. Drier microclimates have higher survival rates than other microhabitats. And some species had high recruitment rates, and that would oftentimes displace the losses of this. It seems to also be found in soil. So this chytrid fungus can persist as kind of a cyst in the soil long term, and in the water too, which makes this kind of the global concern. They also are picking it up in low levels in crayfish, which I wasn't aware of, which I think is kind of interesting. But definitely finding it in the soils. You guys, for anyone who works with Nancy Elwes, the eDNA, right? She does eDNA surveys. Physiological response, immunosuppression. They basically, metabolites inhibit lymphocyte proliferation. They get splenocyte apoptosis, which means cell death. And they get the, issues with their skin and so on. You get a disruption in skin function, electrolyte homeostasis, and ion transport. So again, it's all affecting osmoregulation and the water moving across. I wanted to throw this up here. This is an article that came out in 2019. Basically, where what we're seeing here is examples of this disease and its decline in at least 501 amphibian species over the past half century, including 90 presumed extinctions. It's massive. Declines peaked in the 80s. Only 12% of the declines showed any kind of recovery, and 39% are experiencing ongoing decline. There are some species that are immune to it. These bullfrogs, which are kind of invasive in our area, right, seem to not be impacted as much. And there's another BD species that seems to be impacting European salamanders, in particular the fire salamanders. So this is just a visual here of, you know, what happens to their skin as a result of that. But there is still a chance for us to not have that come over here. Over in the area where this has been found, there's very low diversity in salamander species. Over where we are, over where we are, we have a ton of diversity in salamanders. So if it comes to the US, we are going to lose the salamanders. And thankfully, at least people at SUNY ESF who've been doing some of these surveys in the Adirondacks, we have not picked it up. There's been no obvious pickup of this, but these are the animals that have been impacted by chytrid and how much it's increased over time, and they're in trouble, right? And climate change is obviously going to impact them as well. Look at this child of mine. Anyway, thank you guys for staying on for a little bit longer. If anybody has trouble preparing that book club presentation, just give me a shout. Maybe we can make a trade across days, but hopefully that's going to work out okay. I'm going to do the same thing to set up. I'm going to ask you guys to drop that PowerPoint into the Dropbox, and I will present it, or put it up here, and you'll tell me when to advance. You can kind of unmute yourself and give your presentation, and I will, moving forward, put our link only to join in the Moodle site, and maybe the password above it if you even need it. But that's how we're going to proceed, having you guys join in with the meeting room and stuff. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thank you for dealing with my emotions. I love you guys. Legit. Love you guys.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If we're doing the book with someone else, did you want individual presentations or did you want them together?
Oh, yeah, good point. There were a couple of you guys. Maybe it was just you guys. Was there anyone else on right now? I think it might have just been you guys. Yeah, so did I put you both on the same day? I think
yes.
I did. Okay. Yeah, so we just need one, and maybe you can expand your length a little bit.
We can do like maybe she can do like the first half and I can do like the explanation of the second half. So
Sure.
like, we can split it if
Sure.
that's okay.
Yeah. And feel free to not be constrained in that 8-minute time window if you needed to go go a little broader and bring in pictures or, whatever you wanted to do to make it, worthy of 2 versus the 1.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for reminding me of that. All right. I'm getting the siren, the Rowan siren. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.